everyone, and welcome back to the Cool Your Seat podcast. I am your host, Mr. Scott, and I would like to talk to you all today about a topic that I believe helps a lot more people cope with life. And that, my friends, is hobbies. Now, I do believe that when a lot of people think of hobbies, they think of things such as bike riding. They think of things such as cooking, and they don't really think of it in a proper way. And I do believe that it really harms the state of mind that a lot of people get in during their selection of hobbies, if you will. And I'd like to really go through and address a lot of these concerns, my friends, with you, because I'd like to provide you all with a list of things that you can do, and I'd like to encourage everybody to get hobbies, really. Um, and I do believe that that is a very important thing to really consider when we're dealing with our lives and our futures, because, I mean, let's face the facts here. You're going to need something to do in your downtime, and I don't think that all of you want to take your work into your downtime. And maybe a lot of you don't have downtime, but for those rare special moments of downtime, you might want something to do that isn't just watching Netflix or calling your calling your best friend. Maybe you need something more, and maybe those two things just aren't your cup of tea. So I'd like to address that all with you all today during this episode of Cool Your Seat. So get a nice warm beverage, sit down in a comfy place, sit however you'd like, and my friends, let's talk. Now, I believe that hobbies are a very integral part of what people deal with in their everyday life. And I don't mean that as in everybody has these hobbies that help them cope with anything. Because let's face it, alcoholism isn't a hobby, my friends, and I don't believe that that's one that any of you would actively participate in. But they are ways to really ease the boredom that comes with a lot of downtime in your life. And I know that for a lot of people, their hobbies come in the form of things such as video games or baking, and those are absolutely wonderful hobbies. But video games present this obstacle in that you can't really play them close to bedtime. Because when you play video games and it's almost time for you to rest up and go to bed, it kicks off a chemical in your brain that prevents you from sleeping, which is why it's recommended that you turn off every single one of your screens at least an hour before bedtime. And I'd highly recommend it myself, and you could even incorporate this podcast into your nightly routine before you turn off your screens. But really, during that hour of downtime, you could be doing a different hobby. Now, obviously, an hour doesn't really give you time to bake very much of anything, and you're going to be wanting to go to sleep before that hour is up. Or maybe you have trouble falling asleep, and so you want to be utilizing that hour to get yourself into a place where you can sleep. Now, taking this into consideration, let's talk about some hobbies that you could do during this time. One of the first hobbies that I would always recommend anybody ever do, and especially for you, my friend, is pick up a musical instrument. I don't want any of you to be discouraged by the thought of music, though. I don't want any of you to be doing music for the sake of getting good at it. And I genuinely believe that this mindset of you have to get good at something and you have to be doing everything for the sake of getting good at it. I feel that that's very harmful to people, and especially to you, my friend, because it really enforces this sort of elitist attitude in a lot of people, and I don't think that that's a thing that should happen to you, and I don't think that that's a thing that should happen to anybody. And so, when you're picking up a musical instrument, don't immediately go online for tutorials unless you're just completely stumped on where to get started. But in general, I feel that you should try practicing it on your own, or at the very least, learn some beginning tips and tricks to things, some beginning chords on a guitar, or some beginning ways to move both hands on the piano simultaneously, or even just how to move your bow on a violin, if in fact that is what you're going for, because those are all relatively expensive instruments. Those are definitely more middle class things. If you're really, really on a budget, I'd suggest something like a ukulele. Because even though a cheap one won't really hold a tune for very long, you can always retune it. And it's a very simple instrument to pick up and learn. I know because I have learned the ukulele in the past, and it was a very delicate experience. And even though it was delicate, it was calming. It was a time where I was able to connect with an instrument that I enjoyed, and it was a time where I got to spend my time enriching myself while at the same time not really feeling the need for rush and improvement and results. And I feel that that's a very huge part when it comes to hobbies. You should never do a hobby just for the sake of improving. You can do it to improve, absolutely, and I'm never going to say that you can't. However, if that is the only reason that you have for participating in the hobby, then I do not believe that that should be your primary hobby. You should not just play an instrument to get good at an instrument. You must feel the instrument, and you must be willing to play the instrument, not for the sake of improving, but for the sake of playing. That is why I will always, always recommend to you, my friend. You should always go to a music store and purchase an instrument in a music shop instead of buying an instrument online. You need the feeling of the instrument in your hands, and you need the feeling of playing the instrument to truly judge if an instrument is right for you. And I realize that I just said instrument quite a lot, but my point still stands. But instruments and music are not the only hobbies, and as a matter of fact, it's not the cheapest of hobbies. And so, I'd like to move on to the cheaper hobbies, just because I feel that a lot of people that need this advice are definitely working on more of a budget. So, a huge part of hobbies that you could really get into and explore with yourself is writing and drawing. Writing and drawing are the two most important hobbies, I feel, for human beings besides instruments and singing. Because they're inexpensive. They're absolutely inexpensive. What do you need? A pencil, a piece of paper. Doesn't matter what kind of paper, but chances are, because if you're a student and you need this advice, you're going to have a printer, you could just yoink some printer paper from the nearby office printer. Or, chances are, if you, say, are living by yourself in an apartment, chances are you can get a sheet, a couple hundred pieces of paper for like $3 at your local office store. And you're going to have a pencil or a pen to work with and operate with, and that's and that's really all you need to do to get started with writing and drawing. Now, obviously, there are ways to improve at this craft, but I don't want any of you to go into this with the idea that you're going to be doing this to improve, because that is not the goal that I want any of you to have in mind when you're picking a hobby. A very important part of both of these is not a willingness to improve. It is practice, patience, and persistence. And because you're going to be doing this hobby that you choose a lot, that's all you're going to have for this hobby. If you take my advice and eliminate the feeling and the need for improvement out of yourself. So when you're writing, you will really just be writing stories. And if you need something to write about, go on the internet or go on your phone right now, or not right now, when you start writing, and look up a dialogue prompt. I feel that dialogue is the most simple form of writing for most people. Look up a dialogue prompt and go from there. What prompts do online is they enable you to take a facet of something, they give you an idea, and it allows you to explore that idea how you would like to encapsulate it in your writing. And I think that that is one of the greatest ways to get started writing if you don't want to jump immediately into writing a novel, which you shouldn't. Because writing a novel is something that you do for the sake of improvement. A very basic idea of this, and a very more relaxed and casual form of this, is writing fan fiction. Now, I know that a lot of you just heard me say the phrase fan fiction and rolled your eyes all the way back into your skulls, and I'm not talking about the kind of fan fiction that I'm sure you're envisioning right now. What I'm talking about is taking a couple of characters that you know how to write very well or how to interpret very well, or even just creating a couple of your own and throwing them into a scenario. The beauty of fan fiction, as compared to trying to write a novel, is that fan fictions can be fragments of something. They can be shards of something and still be loved by communities and people the world over, and it will be a way to express yourself to others, such as the way that music is, and such as the way that a lot of hobbies are, if you really need that validation within your hobby to get the full enjoyment and relaxation out of it. A lot of writing fan fiction is creating a shard of something and then expanding. And maybe you'll come up with a whole thing. Maybe you won't. That's not your concern. What is your concern is doing the thing and doing it right, and immediately. You shouldn't sit there planning something and then never write it. And I found that as soon as you get the first couple of words on the page, it starts to flow. So it really is just overcoming the first obstacle of getting started. And it's the same way with drawing, except you don't really have to go to dialogue prompts for drawing. You can really start with a line on a page and expand upon that line however you want. You can start drawing basic shapes on a page and seeing how those basic shapes can extend from themselves. Or You can choose a random animal or concept and attempt to portray that on your page and piece of paper. And that is a very good way of really getting started in drawing, and it's a very good way to draw, and it's a good way to pass the time. You can just start drawing an eagle or a fox. It doesn't have to look good. It never has to look good. The point is that you made something, and it's yours. It's your creation. You made it, and for that very reason alone, it's special. Now, I will be the first to say, I am not good at drawing. I'm not a master at drawing. In fact, I'm sure by now, if you watch the podcast, you've seen the logo on the screen that you're currently facing, and I drew that. But I didn't draw it because I wanted to improve, and I didn't draw it because I thought it was going to be any good. I drew it because I wanted to, and that is what makes it special to me. And I do believe that is what will make your future drawings special to you. Now, my friend, those may be very wonderful hobbies, but maybe you're not really into any of that. Maybe you don't want to put any money down at all on a hobby. Maybe you just want something to pass the time with, which is where I find that a lot of people have already started doing this, but they don't do it during times when they would do a hobby. And that, my friend, is sing. Now, obviously, not everybody is going to be good at singing. And hell, you don't have to be good at singing. I will never tell you that you have to do something because you're going to be good at it. However, I do believe that it is very vital that people understand that singing can very much be a hobby, and it's very much a very viable hobby to participate in. A lot of people do sing, and a lot of people sing quite often, and I love that. I love hearing as I'm passing them by on the street, or as I'm simply looking at them in their cars, because I enjoy people watching. Seeing these people singing their heart out, and even though they're no good at it, it doesn't stop them from just freeing themselves and singing along to whatever's playing. Now, obviously, because this is your 1 hour hobby time, and you won't have your electronics on, and you won't be having a screen on, you don't have to have the music in the background. I've found that most people have 1 or 2 songs that they have memorized, and those are the songs that you should sing in your downtime. And hell, you can even start singing a song that you don't know all the way through during the time when you have access to the song, so that way when your hobby time rolls around, you can practice singing the song without the supporting music behind it. And that can help you learn the song faster. And I think that that's an absolutely wonderful thing, and that's a very noble hobby to have, because it's the most freeing of all hobbies, and it's a hobby that you can do almost anywhere, except of course libraries or places that there needs to be extreme quiet, and even then you can whisper sing to yourself, or you can mouth the lyrics to yourself. And it's absolutely wonderful, and it's one of the most gorgeous things to witness a person doing. Because in that moment, you know that a person is at their most, I don't want to say vulnerable, but they're definitely at their most prized. They're definitely experiencing something that you can't really find anywhere else on Earth. And I think that that is a wonderful thing to have in a hobby, especially one that you're going to be doing before bed. Another thing is keeping a journal. And I know what you're going to say to me, but Mr. Scott, I don't know how to keep a journal, keeping a journal isn't a hobby either. It's probably something that you do for therapy, but you don't need to. And I feel that that's a very fundamental principle that I think that I want everybody here to learn. And that especially goes for you, my friend. You don't need to do something for the sake of anything except doing the thing. You don't have to write a journal as a therapeutic thing. You don't have to write a journal to put your thoughts to a paper. Here's what you can do to write a journal every night during that hour before bed when the screens are off. Sit down, relax in a chair, maybe with a nice cup of tea or hot cocoa or hot chocolate, depending on what version you like to drink, or decaffeinated coffee if you're into that sort of thing, even though I personally believe that it's a bit sacrilegious to decaffeinate your coffee. But sit down with this warm beverage and write down a couple notable events that happened to you that day. Even if it's something as simple as a squirrel came very close to me today, or the Starbucks cashier that I love getting drinks from smiled a little bit wider at me today, or that meeting that I went to was much more expedient than I remember it would have been. And really, just by getting these thoughts on a page, you're writing a journal, and it lets you catalog your everyday life and events, and really, I think that that's a very nice thing to do, because when you're late in your life, or if you're, hell, even getting on in age, your next of kin, your family members might be able to dig up this journal that you've written, and they'd really just get to look at it, read it, and get into your headspace of what you were doing at that time and what you were going through at that point in your life. Obviously, not all of this is going to be a good thing, my friend. You might have to write about the death of a family member or the death of a long-term friend, because that might be the most notable, heartbreaking thing that happened to you. But in this way, it helps you cope with that sort of event, because you'll, instead of keeping this all bottled inside of you and just really letting it get to you and eat at the core of you, you're really just letting it out there. And it's the same way that you would feel if you were ranting to a longtime friend about what's going on in your life. And later on in your life, you'll be able to look back on what you've written and go, man, I have been through a lot, but I've survived through it all. And hell, through all of those good parts in your journal, you'll be able to look back at that and go, wow, I remember that. That was a crazy time. And it'll really help you just remember the stories that you can tell. Because one of the most criminally underrated things about a person's life is the stories they can tell. Just as well, there are a lot of other hobbies, but these aren't really hobbies that you would do for anything other than to maybe improve on them or to use them as potential experience for a job. These sorts of things would be cooking, or something even as out there as sign making. And speaking of sign making, now I'd like to take a word from our sponsor. Do you own a business? Well, StoreSignPros.com is the home of the pre-made sign. Any word, any size, any color. Your go-to sign fabricator for custom signage. They offer direct wholesale pricing straight from the factory. They also provide 100% free artwork upon request at no additional charge. So just go to StoreSignPros.com and use the code CYS10 to get a certain percentage off your purchase. That's storesignpros.com, and use the code CYS10, as in Cool Your Seats 10, to get, presumably, 10% off your purchase. Thank you to Store Sign Pros for sponsoring this episode of Cool Your Seats. Now, I'd like to wrap things up with a little scenario for you to get yourselves wrapped up in. Now, I'd like us all to really just think back on what we learned today, my friend, because, well, we talked about a lot. We discussed a lot of hobbies that we could go through, such as learning a musical instrument, drawing, writing, keeping a journal, and we really went through our paces of just what there was that we could do in the downtime between when we should turn off all of our electronics and all of our devices and start getting ready for bed. The activities that I discussed with you today are all about winding down and letting yourself be prepared to go to sleep. And a lot of the activities that I discussed will really open you up to vulnerability in your life. And I feel that those moments of vulnerability are also the moments of the most clarity, really. Those are the moments when we can see ourselves for who we are. And those are the moments when we can really just unleash. We don't have to keep up a facade for anybody else or for ourselves. We don't have to pretend anything. We are just there, and we are doing things for the sake of doing them. And that is one of the most carnal experiences I believe anybody can have. And I genuinely believe that that is one of the best parts of life and living on this earth as we are. Now, of course, to round out these final moments of our Cool Your Seat podcast, I'd like to end everything off with a fantasy. Just a little place to keep yourself and to drift off to when you're just feeling attacked, pushed down upon, or put in the hot seat. You can remember this fantasy and you can really just look back on it through all your days or until next week when I put out my next podcast. And you can look back on this particular fantasy and just unwind and relax. So, without further ado, let's begin. You're sitting in your room. It's quiet. It's peaceful. You smell your favorite smell, whether it be cookies in the oven or the smell of a fireplace and the Yuletide logs burning, or maybe even just the smell of autumn in the air. And you're sitting there listening to your favorite song, the song that makes you feel the most emotions. You're singing along, you're cozy, you have a warm beverage in hand, and you are letting yourself go. You're singing along to this song, letting your lungs burn with all the emotion and passion that is due for this song. During the solos and the musical bits where there isn't any singing, you're taking sips out of your hot beverage. And it's that moment of clarity where all is well. You hear on the outside your favorite sound, whether it be of the howling winds, maybe there's rain going on outside, a thunderstorm, a gorgeous, lovely thunderstorm. Maybe it's the sound of traffic in a busy street on the outside. Maybe it's just the sound of children playing. Maybe it's something entirely different. It's your experience and it's your life. And so I'd like you actually all to tell me about that favorite sound to hear as an ambient noise, maybe in the comments section. But as you're sitting there singing your heart out, listening to the ambiance and really smelling your favorite smell, letting yourself go, you discover that moment of clarity. You look over in a mirror that you have in your room and you see you. You don't see this stranger or this mask that you put on each day in the mirror. You don't see a facade of yourself, your inner self. You see you. And in that moment, you look and you have never felt more like yourself than ever before. Can you feel it? I believe that that's one of the most wonderful feelings, my friend, and I hope that you can feel it as you lose yourself in this fantasy. Now, until next week, my name is Mr. Scott. This has been the third episode of Cool Your Seat, and I hope to see you all next week. Good evening, safe travels, and good night.